and it is my extreme privilege to introduce to you Anhaita Jamula, who is the research director at EvergreenHealth and who has an extensive resume detailing lots of space in research and as a research coordinator and then a manager and now the director of research at EvergreenHealth, which is a hospital system that's just east of Seattle. So with no further ado, I'll hand it over to Anhaita. Thank you so much for being here.
Sounds great. Thank you so much, Kristen, and everybody for having me here today. I'm really excited to talk more about the clinical research pathways, and this is a field that I'm very passionate about and has been a great, wonderful allied health profession, and I'm really excited to talk about that today. So today's agenda is I'm going to talk a little bit more about myself. I'm going to give you a little bit about my background, specifically then into EvergreenHealth and the work we do there. I'll give a broad brushstroke of clinical research and different phases of trials in clinical research. And then we'll jump right into the meat of the matter, which is careers in research, with a focus toward what happens at the clinical research site. And then toward the end of my presentation, we'll talk about your average day at a clinical research site. And if we have time, I'll talk about some themes that have kind of, appeared in my career path and what I'd like to, some wisdom I'd like to share with you and some resources. And that's contingent on, how much time we have. A little bit of background about my team. I'm the daughter of 2 immigrants. I moved here when I was 15 years of age, and I'm actually the first person in my family that got a 4-year degree. And when I say that alone was a feat, it really, really was. I had to work almost full-time hours, carrying a full load, trying to finish 2 degrees in a 4-year period of time. And so it was definitely a feat for me to get through both high school and college, trying to support much of that on my own. I ended up graduating in 1996 and got a degree in some pretty hard science in cell and molecular biology in 2000. And over the last 20 years, I've really worked on developing a combination of both science and business, because that's where my interest really is. And I have about 20 years of experience working in hospital systems, 15 years in management. And, when I look back now, I realize that all of the positions that I've held, I've been invited to be in those roles because I build teams. And that's something I know that I've learned to do pretty well. And in any case, I have a team of 25 individuals right now, from research coordinators to research assistants, research nurses, and an admin staff. And if you want to take a little bit of a peek on the kind of work we do, go check out this website, because it tells you on a very deep level the kind of work that we do. And no work is possible without having an incredible team. And this is my very fabulous research team, and we welcome both dogs and cats alike. We also have a lot of fun. This was the last party we threw. It was a baby shower for a baby girl. We welcomed into our team. And if you look at our team, you'll notice one thing, which is we are a pretty diverse research program. Of the 25 some individual team members we have on the team, we have a lot of different nationalities. And actually, up until a couple of years ago, we had 15. We're now down to about 4 or 5 nationalities. And this is the list of people, the number of people we have on the team from all of the different countries. And one of our physicians that we work with says we win because we have a winning team. And I can't say that any more emphatically about ours. I think we actually have one of the best teams on this planet. And it's because of all of the various people that bring such a diverse skill set and a diverse thought process to the work we do. About EvergreenHealth, we are a community district hospital. We have 3 campuses spread across the east side, and we have a research program that we run here within the hospital system. And we have a study for every patient approach. And what that means is when a patient walks in to a clinic, let's just say in the Neuroscience Institute or the infectious disease program, our expectation is that when they see the nurse or the physician or, community support groups, that they also encounter the research coordinator or the research nurse. And that's because we want research to be front and center of any kind of therapy or care that the patient receives at EvergreenHealth. And in fact, our vision for the research program is that we want to have a clinical trial for every patient that walks in the door. So what is clinical research? Well, clinical research is a systematic investigation of a drug, a device, or a biologic. It is either observational or interventional in nature. It involves people, and the goals of these trials or these systematic investigations are to diagnose disease better, or to improve the symptoms of a disease, or to improve the quality of life in some cases, and finally the ultimate North Star, right, which is to cure the disease. And we went through a process of interviewing some of our research assistants, research participants in the past, and one of them was quoted here to say, "I am a medical hero because I participated on a research trial." And so, from our coordinator team to our nursing team alike, there's a lot of pride in the work that we do because we feel that we changed the face of medicine. A little bit of history and evolution of clinical research and ethics. Well, clinical research trials date back to 500 BCE. And back then they involved a lot of dietary and specific foods and herbs. And over time, as you guys know, there's a lot more trials that are going on in drugs. And certainly the COVID-19 pandemic has really brought that to light, the impact that research has in the world of medicine. And over the years, efforts have been made to refine and design the practices of ethics in clinical trials. And that is what we call the regulatory world. And, and you'll learn a little bit more about that later on. A little bit of history involving human beings in research trials. The need for ethics and research goes back to the 1940s, going all the way back to the Nuremberg Code and all the way into the 90s when the Good Clinical Trial Practice Guideline was created by the FDA. And it continues to be honed. So I won't jump into too much of the regulatory piece today because that is not the focus, but just know that there is a huge career aspect in regulations of clinical trials. So why do clinical research? Well, because we want our patients to receive clinical cutting edge treatments that are not already on the market. And so case in point, right, all of the different vaccines that you guys saw come out recently in the last couple of years for COVID-19, or drugs that have come to market that historically were not approved. We want to be able to give that kind of care and that kind of cutting edge treatment to all patients that come into EvergreenHealth. The other reason for doing research is providers want to have high standards of care. And so what that means is, as a physician, as a nurse, as a medical assistant, you continuously want to improve upon your skills and your standards of how you care for patients. A physician that treated diabetes 50 years ago is not treating diabetes the exact same way. The world has changed in medicine, and it's through clinical research that happens. And then finally, we want to increase to the world's knowledge, right, and understanding of the disease. And that alone is a big, lofty reason for us to want to do clinical research. So what are the phases of trials? You'll probably learn about this a lot more if you do go into research. But I just want to show here that in the FDA world, there are 4 basic phases of trials, and each of them starts with testing the safety of a drug or a device first. So that's phase 1. And usually in phase 1, all we're doing is safety. We're just assessing safety. And it's on a very few number of people. It's just looking at, but we want to make sure that whatever we're doing is going to be safe. And then phase 2s and phase 3s is where you end up adding efficacy of the drug. And efficacy is a big word, but basically what that means is the drug doing what it's supposed to do? Does the Tylenol stop the headache? Does the this pill, does it actually make the blood thinner? Things like that. So phase 2s and phase 3 start building on efficacy. And then finally, phase 4 is once you have approved the drug is on the market, the FDA oftentimes says, you know what, we want to keep looking at safety and efficacy. It's not enough that it's on the market. We want to make sure that long term, it still makes sense to use this drug. And that's phase 4 trials. Okay. Our team does primarily phase 1s, phase 2s, and phase 3s. Some careers on the sponsor side, if you're working in clinical research, there is just a vast plethora of different kinds of jobs you can have. You can help write and design protocol, all of different scientific backgrounds. People with all kinds of backgrounds are welcome in those kinds of jobs. You could be a lab scientist or a clinical scientist, a little bit like me, because I started out working in a lab. I'm a cell and molecular biologist by training. I ended up loving the business of medicine. But ultimately, that is what interested me in medicine, is cell and molecular biology. You could be a statistician or an MSL or a medical director looking at safety of the drug. You could be a technical writer. You could be writing abstracts and different kinds of evidence pieces for the sponsor's company, a drug safety rep or a regulatory rep, a project manager, or a lawyer. You'll start to see lots of overlaps between the kinds of jobs that you can have between the sponsor side and the regulatory side. The regulatory side, like I said earlier, is, it's a vast field. You have a group of people that look at the health, the welfare, the safety of human participants on trials, and that's called the Institutional Review Board. You could be hired to work for them to make sure that all of the projects we're working on are safe, are efficacious, or you could be a project manager coordinating, all of these studies on an ongoing basis. You could also be what's called a CRA or a study monitor. So you could be the person that comes out to the site and looks at all of the data the site is generating, make sure that it's correct, that it makes sense, correlates. And again, here, you could be a regulatory personnel or a project manager or a lawyer, because guess what? They're needed every single place, right? Or you could be at a site like mine, which is a clinical research side. And here you could be in a hospital or a clinic, or you could be in a large academic center like the University of Washington, which is a great example. You could be a doctor who is in charge of running clinical trials. They're called principal investigators. Or you could be a nurse or an MA who actually run the clinical research studies on a day-to-day basis. So the doctors may not always see the patients every time the patients come in, but nurse and MAs, you bet they do. They see the patients 3 or 4 times more than the doctor does. The doctor keeps in touch with their records and makes sure that there's good oversight. But on a day-to-day basis, it's your nurses, your MAs, your phlebotomists, your lab techs. Or you could be, again, on the regulatory, legal, or administrative side, which is what I am. As I said, over time, I was the science geek that started loving more and more the work associated with running that department. And I wanted to run all research departments. And for me, and I'll talk a little bit more later about why that developed over time, it's because I realized my passion was really clinical research, and I wanted to provide that as an option to everybody that walks into a hospital system. So your typical day at a research site, well, if you were working at EvergreenHealth, for example, you would be reviewing patient safety data. You would be in charge. You would be looking at any changes in baseline of, their condition, no matter what that condition is. So we see patients with COVID-19 or Parkinson's or MS, etc., heart failure, etc. So we would be continuously, assessing these patients with blood tests and EKGs and vitals. So, very clinical in nature, right? But then on top of that, we would be assessing whether the drug is actually working on the patient or not. There's lots of ways to do that. The sponsors usually define the endpoints in each protocol. And they say, well, this is what we're going to be tracking. So it could be questionnaires or it could be scans. And that's about half of your day. And then the other half of your day, you could be doing data entry because at the end of the day, you have to upload all this data to the FDA, right? Make sure that they know what we're doing. So there's a lot of data entry, a lot of meetings with study monitors to make sure that we're doing our work correctly. And then finally, just understanding that clinical trials require extra precaution and observation for study patients more than a clinic visit. So in the realm of Parkinson's, for example, these patients come every 3 months, every 6 months. It is very typical for us to see these patients every week, sometimes every month. And that's because we want to keep a really, really keen, close eye on them to make sure that the drug that we're testing is better or as good as what's on the market. It's not any worse, okay? So there's a lot of oversight on the patient. And so here, all of this is to say that if you were working at a research site and you were in healthcare, so whether you were doing hard science or you had soft skills, like maybe you're a social worker and you want to meet people, or maybe you're a technician or a phlebotomist, or an MD, you could be working at a research site, because that is the kind of teamwork and very integrated care that clinical trials require. As a research director, how do I spend my day? Well, I have to understand the science first. That is where it starts. So understanding the science to help pick the right trials for our patients, for our departments, to understand how the treatment is affecting the patients, okay? Understanding the business so I can make the right choices for our team, There are some drugs that we know may not work as well because of the mechanism of action, or there are some drugs or devices that may be better, or sometimes you want to have both the competitors because you don't know which one is going to work. I also work with our internal and external teams to deliver quality data to the FDA. And all of this is to say, I basically run the program. I run the team of people that help delivers all of this data to the FDA. I speak with a lot of sponsors, I review budgets, I implement policies and procedures that support the conduct of clinical research in a hospital setting. And never underestimate the power and importance of teamwork. None of my projects, not one thing about my job would be successful if I wasn't, surrounded by an incredible team. And so a huge portion of my work is all about engaging in teamwork, facilitating teamwork, allowing teamwork. And that's the one thing that I would say, you need that in any setting in healthcare. So we've spoken about a lot of new terms here, but I want to kind of point out that everything is connected. So we are a research site right here, right? Well, we submit information on our patients to the FDA, right? It's all anonymized. Similarly, you have a patient, and the patient is talking to both the IRB that eventually talks to the FDA. And finally, as a site, we also work with the sponsors, right? The Pfizers, the Mercks of the world, the Modernas, example, and sponsors work with the FDA. So what that means is all of us are working hand in hand with each other to make sure that the data that we're collecting on clinical trials is good, solid data, that it's clean data, that whatever drug that's being investigated that comes to market has been thought through, that there has been good oversight from the doctors, from the nurses, from the medical assistants that are doing the work on the ground level. And ultimately, that is how drugs and devices and different kinds of medical interventions come to market. So I wanted to talk about a few themes, and this is where I want to share some personal stories about myself. My first theme in my career that I learned year after year in more than one setting is I had to give myself second chances. Very early on in my life, I had wanted to be a physician, and for a variety of reasons, I did not get in, and I did not get there. And I thought that, I'm going to go try out this thing called research, and let me see where it takes me. And I had to work really hard and really well. But in my first job that I landed as a research coordinator, my boss thought that I was doing such a great job that she said, I'm going to see if I can get you some kind of a small, like a little bonus or something. Usually it's not typical to do that, because you have to be in the company for a year, but I'm going to see if I can make an exception. So I was called to this meeting with about 30 different people, and it was a mandatory meeting. We could not miss it. And all of the people who were invited had been with the company for 10, 15, 20 years. And I thought, well, here's my bonus. I'm going to go in and go get my bonus. And we were all in the room, and we were all told in one fell swoop that if we were in that room that day, that we were no longer part of the future of that company. The company was basically going bankrupt. And so here I was, I had done so well. I had done an amazing job. My boss was so happy. She was trying to make exceptions to get me a bonus, but somehow it always weighed on me. It always bothered me that somebody made a decision out there, right, higher up, that made the company have bad business and it went under. And so this is the example that I give now, is where I one day thought I was walking in to go get a bonus, and I walked out with a severance check. So yes, I did get a check that day, and it was a severance check. But that incident was pivotal in my life, because it taught me that I not only wanted to do a good job, but I also wanted to be in the position where I made decisions. And I wanted those decisions to be mine, and I didn't want to be in a place where that bad business could occur, even on such a high productive team. And so the questions I asked myself were back then, well, I already had the science background, but I didn't have enough business background. And so how could I have controlled this better? How could I make more autonomous decisions so that I wasn't in that situation again? And as time evolved, I ended up learning a lot about the Toyota production system, lean methodologies, culture change, people management, business and portfolio development, all these things that I learned, right? I learned them because I never wanted to be in that position again. And so part of being successful, in my opinion, is this first theme, is giving yourself second chances, okay? The next theme is I want to tell you how to develop your why. It's really important for you to think about your why. Why do you do this? Why are you choosing this field? Why are you choosing this job in this field? Keep honing your why. I'm still honing my why 20 years down the road. And I have learned over 20 years that my why doesn't change. It just gets deeper and deeper and more flavorful and more meaningful. And so when you're picking your career and when you're picking, your field, be values driven. Think about why you want to do what you want to do. And I actually have a personal story here as well. I was in my first or second year of management. I had been in research for about 6 or 7 years, and I had just had my first baby. She was 6 weeks old. And I have a mom who lives here in Seattle. And, my mom had not been well for a good 6 months to a year. And basically 6 weeks after my daughter was born, I found out that my mom was diagnosed with cancer. And so here I went from this person who had just delivered a baby and I wanted to be taken care of, to a person who needed to take care of a baby and an ailing mom. And I had done all this research, right? I had done all this research about what oncology looks like, what leukemia looks like. And I was expecting all of this, hair loss and weight loss and all of these side effects and chemotherapy and radiation. And we were in the doctor's office one day. I took my daughter with me in her car seat. My mom was next to me, and the doctor basically held this pill in his hand, and he tells my mom, now, you will be taking this pill for the rest of your life. And if you're lucky, and if you keep compliance on it, which you take it every single day, then you'll be like the majority of the people with this disease, which means in about 2 to 3 years, you will be in remission and you will not die of cancer. And I was floored. I had done so much research. I thought I knew so much about leukemia, and I was floored. And as life would have it, 3 years later, my mom did end up being in remission. And 14 years later, she has seen 3 grandchildren be born. She's still around, happy, healthy, 65-year-old grandma of 3. And it's thanks to clinical research. And this physician, basically, I asked him at that time, I said, but what about this? Well, what about this? What about, and he said, thanks to clinical research, she no longer has to do chemotherapy, no longer has to do radiation. It's just this pill, and that's it. And this physician had no idea what I did for a living. And that was the first time my why developed. This is why I do clinical research, because somebody out there participated on trials. Somebody led clinical trials that led to my mom seeing her 3 grandchildren over the last 14 and a half years. So keep honing your why, because it's there and it'll just get better and better over the years. And then theme number 3, pay it forward and do it well, do it holistically, become a mentor, help others shatter glass ceilings. I say this now because years ago, I would tell myself I felt like a failure because I didn't go to med school. I didn't achieve my dream. I just was, I lost my first job that I thought I was doing so well in. And a few years ago, I was told that I've been shattering glass ceilings. And so when you think about it, right, you don't shatter glass ceilings on your own. You do it when you have a lot of help around you. So you become that mentor. When the time is right, you will know when it's time. Become that mentor. Get involved in the community. You can integrate personal life and work life into your realm. So for example, I feel really strongly about helping my community. So I actually volunteer with a couple of different organizations. I am a youth mentor to high schoolers in our school district. And you can do, stuff in your life that aligns with your own personal values, but figure out a way to pay it forward. Don't just think about the job you want, think about the life you want. And so what do you think your first step might be? I'll actually finish up with this last story. I have studied with a lot of sports psychologists, and I actually worked with one who used to be a sports psychologist that worked on the Tiger Woods team. And he would tell me, this is the way that we train athletes. What we do when we train athletes, let's say you're working with a golfer, we tell the golfer, I want you to think about how the air is flowing. Close your eyes and just think about how the air is flowing. I want you to think about the grass. How does it smell today? Do you smell the grass today? I want you to think about the green, and I want you to think about every blade of the green. And then I want you to think about holding, right, I forget what it's called, your club. And I want you to think about getting that club right next to that ball. And I want you to think about swinging in such a way that when you go down, you swing that ball high up there so fast and so good that it goes right into the hole. And I want you to imagine what that sound feels like when the ball goes right into that hole. And I want you to do it every single day, a few times a day. I want you to imagine what that wind looks like, okay? That's an exercise that sports psychologists teach their athletes. To basketball players, they teach, what does that swish sound like? That swish when the ball goes in, right? Your 3-pointer. What does that sound like? What does that feel like, right? And when you practice that over and over again in your mind's eye, you actually bring the fruit of your hard work to your present. And when you do that, you actually build one of the best athletes, in the world. And so my question to you guys is, what do you think your first step will be? What will you imagine your first step toward getting that swish or getting that ball in the hole? That is why we're here today. And I hope that I've inspired you a little bit about clinical research. I'm available to answer any questions you guys have. You can shoot some emails my way and I'm happy to answer those. And I also collected some reading resources about teamwork and just in general science and medicine, and just some kind of life's advice kind of books that I thought would be great for you guys. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Anhaita. It's wonderfully inspiring stories about your why. I hope that inspires all of you to develop your own why as you go after your careers in healthcare. And thank you so much for joining this session.